What we've seen this last week with the hepatitis A scare in the frozen berries, which were grown and packaged in China, is really indicative of the problem that we've had with our food safety laws here in Australia. We have much stronger laws for locally grown food, much better environmental protections, much better health protections, much better labour laws for that matter, than produce that's grown in other countries. And so what the Greens have been calling for this week, and in fact have been calling for several years now, but we're yet to get support from the other parties, is for proper country of origin labelling. At the moment, when you've got a product that's part grown in Australia, or maybe it's packaged in Australia, or it's made in Australia from local and imported ingredients, nobody knows what on earth those labels mean. And it's very hard to work out, is what I'm buying, has it actually been grown in Australia, or has it just been repackaged here? So we'd like to reform the food labelling system so that consumers can easily see on the packet or on the label whether it's been grown in Australia to those higher standards that we know we can rely on. Now, the interesting thing here is that, of course, with all the free trade agreements that have been signed recently and that are soon to be signed, if we were to introduce stronger food labelling laws, there's the potential that those free trade agreements would undermine those laws, given the inclusion of what's called investor-state dispute settlement provisions, which is a fancy way of saying other nations' corporations can challenge legal reforms that the Parliament seeks to pass to protect its consumers. So the concern with the free trade agreements is obviously first that it's giving equal footing to overseas produced food, whereas the Greens think we should be supporting locally grown food and our local farmers, given that it's a benefit to our economy and the better health and environment standards. But these free trade agreements give a leg up to overseas producers, and they also then give massive power to the big food giants, the international food giants, to challenge any additional regulation the government might seek to put on food labelling to better protect consumers. So huge concerns for the free trade agreements, and yet such a clear way forward to try and fix our food labelling. It's about time the other parties got on board with this. Clearly, this latest example has shown how much better we need to do on food labelling, and it's a very simple solution that consumers support and want and deserve. So we're calling on the other parties to back our country of origin labelling bill, which we've reintroduced into the Parliament last week, and to just rethink these hasty signing ups to the free trade agreements that seem to be forced upon us, which are clouded in a shroud of secrecy.
Do you know that for sure, though, that the free trade agreement, say with China, would expose us to international litigation, perhaps under a WTO or under sort of free trade agreements within the courts, if our Parliament did move to strengthen food labelling laws? Are we exposed?
Look, we're exposed with the upcoming signing of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is the latest free trade agreement that Australia's negotiating with a host of other countries. That one does include those investor-state dispute settlement clauses, which is a huge concern because until very recently, Australia has insisted on those clauses not being included in its free trade agreements, and for good reason. The Australian Parliament is the one that should be making the decision about what laws should apply in Australia. It is just an affront to democracy to say that multinational corporations under a free trade agreement should have the right to sue the Australian government if they change the laws to better protect consumers or the environment, that in a way that affects the profits of that company. That's what those ISDS clauses do. They give the right to sue to a company, to sue the Australian government if they strengthen the rules in a way that adversely affects their profit. It's just such an outrageous concept. I can't believe that the Abbott government is even considering signing up to anything that's got those clauses in there.
So that's been the case, say, with Philip Morris and plain packaging labelling for cigarettes, with moving their company to Hong Kong. You're saying exactly the same thing could happen with food labelling.
Look, that's exactly right. We saw with the plain packaging laws, with the inclusion of those investor-state dispute settlement clauses in the free trade agreement, that those international cigarette companies could sue the Australian government for the plain packaging laws. It's exactly the same concept that could happen if the Parliament were to pass our country of origin labelling laws, and I hope that it does. If those free trade agreements contain those clauses and are signed in time, then those food labelling laws could be challenged by overseas companies that lower and environment standards on their foods and that don't want profits adversely affected by good labelling laws. So it's all the more reason for the Parliament to promptly pass our country of origin labelling bill, which could get through the Parliament in a matter of weeks. It's ready to go. We've put it into successive parliaments. It's been well examined. It's well supported by the community. Let's get those laws through quickly, give consumers the information they need so that they can make the choices when they buy their food about supporting local farmers and knowing that they're choosing a better health and environment outcome with their food. And let's make sure that those free trade agreements don't include those ISDS clauses, or at least that we can get the labelling laws in before those free trade agreements take effect.
Okay, Senator Larissa Waters, thanks for joining us from Toowoomba today.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you, Chris. Until next week.